James Sykes, President, Director, and CEO of Baselode Energy Corp. We're a uranium exploration company focusing on near-surface, basement-hosted, high-grade uranium deposits outside of the Athabasca Basin in Northern Saskatchewan. Our recent discovery, the ACKIO project up in Northern Saskatchewan, is one of these discoveries, and we think it has the longevity and all of the characteristics required to be an open-pit mine in the Athabasca Basin area, reviving outside of the basin mining.
James, thank you for the introduction. Good to be speaking to you again. Yeah, outside of the basin, but intimately related to the basin. So part of the same geological system, part of the same broad mineralizing event. And you've just been drilling Catharsis. You've been drilling another project. Hot off the news release of the first 8 holes. You've drilled 1,630 meters. And you haven't got the assays back, but you have got the first indications of logging and scintillometer readings. Tell us about that, please.
Yeah, very happy with what we've seen. I think it achieved more than what we expected. Honestly, we didn't know what to expect to find with this drill program being between 60 to 80 kilometers away from the basin edge. But we do believe that the basin covered this area at one time, which makes it lucrative because if the basin was overlying Catharsis during the mineralization event 1.5 billion years ago, then you've got potential for basement-hosted mineralization. That's what we're trying to vector in on. 2 holes in particular, holes 5 and holes 8, had some very encouraging alteration, things that we have seen, our team and I have seen around basement-hosted mineralization, even some of these features we're seeing over at Akio. So it's definitely an area of interest, and when you actually put 2 and 2 together, you've got this hematite, this very strong hematite quartz system in hole 5, which when you think of hematite, there's your oxidized fluids, and then you've got your clay alteration and your chlorite, thick alteration, and just that the intensity of it, that's the word I was looking for, an intense alteration sequence over 17 meters in hole 8, and that's all your reduced front. Well, when you think about how these deposits really form, it's that redox trap that precipitates uranium from fluids. So where your oxidized hematized fluids meet your reduced fluids, that's where you're going to get your potential for deposit formation. And so we've seen both sides. We just haven't seen that redox front, but we've seen indications in anywhere from holes 5, 6, 7, 8 of a larger fluid pathway system.
Essentially, on a roll front, you've got the meeting point of these 2 fluids, and what you've seen is one side, which is the oxidized, clip that in hole 5. And what's the distance to hole 8 where you've got the clay indicative of the reduced fluid?
400 meters.
400 meters. So plenty of space within which to hide the first whiffs or the first vectors of a mineral deposit, although these are perhaps the first vectors towards something. Just taking a step back from this, how did you come to drill those 8 holes? What were your guiding principles on the orientation and the planning behind that 8-hole system? Presumably this is an untested area.
Absolutely untested. We targeted 3 different types of airborne geophysics surveys. So we were targeting conductors and where we saw gravity lows associated with those conductors, but we're also looking for certain features within the conductors themselves. So brighter areas or lower areas, diminished conductive response and higher conductive response, the proper way to say it. So those type of areas that are associated with gravity lows, but also using the magnetics to help hone in on some of these targets. It's a big project, and this whole target area that we just drilled was basically about 2 kilometers long.
You've done some very wide-spaced kind of conceptual or first-pass drilling with it, which will help you to kind of calibrate your geophysical information. In a sense, this is ground truthing with a drill rig.
Yes. Well, it is and it isn't. It's it's something that you have to do, but we had some amazing targets that we had identified earlier on, and this is one of those targets. It looked great. It looked like things that I have previously been part of with ground truthing activities in other companies. So Hathor, NextGen, ACKIO. These are the same type of anomalies that we would drill that do lead to deposits. They don't always lead to deposits, unfortunately. Otherwise, we'd just be laughing all the way. But they help us vector into the best target areas and the best chances to make these discoveries. So now that we have ground truth, that yes, now we can go back and start refining the geophysical surveys and start looking at some of the other target areas that we have previously identified and just reinterpreting them.
There are many questions, but one question straight up is, what's the cover here? Well, how much mapping can you do of the geology, or is it all till covered?
It's not all till covered. This is an area with a lot of outcrop exposure. However, the outcrop that is exposed are not the rocks that we want. It's typically the Archean orthogneisses that are left exposed at the surface, and any of the softer rocks, or your metasediments, which are typically softer. If anything's clay altered, all of your graphitic rocks, those are going to be scoured away due to glaciation. And typically you do get thicker accumulations of overburden of glacial till that get deposited in these little valleys. We did have a prospecting program back in 2021 though that also identified a massive quartzite ridge. That was a target area that we have planned to revisit, because if you think of quartzite ridges, the first thing that pops into my mind is Phoenix, MacArthur River, two of the highest grade deposits in the world associated with quartzite ridges, and we've got beautiful targets along that.
So a lot of the target geology is less resistant to weathering, and so it forms topographic lows and therefore gets covered, and presumably there's always the possibility that they could be swampy or
yes,
muddy or marshier ground. And
that's, to be honest though, that's the history of the Athabasca. It's a running joke in the Athabasca that if you want to find a deposit, you have to drill the lakes and you have to drill the swamps, because that's where your deposits are going to be.
You're going to get your feet wet, because that's where the when you get an elevated hydrothermal system, it breaks down the integrity of the rock. They may even be within a weaker rock anyway. The characteristics of your rock may influence the fluid dynamics, and which then gets further weakened by having concentrated your fluid flow through that less resistant rock in the first place. So it's kind of a cumulative effect.
Exactly.
So can you spot the sediments? This is what you look at in the geophysics. Once you've got a handle on it, once you've calibrated through your drilling, once you've calibrated the geophysical response, will you be able to better map the units in the Catharsis area?
Pretty well, yes.
What are the next steps? You've got to go for assay, then you've got to reinterpret, and then what happens? And then what are the timelines?
That's a really good question, because we've also got ACKIO that we want to get back to this summer. What takes precedence is obviously ACKIO, since we do have mineralization, and we need to follow that up and hopefully get to a resource. So Catharsis might take a little bit of a back burner. We do have time between now and when we get back to ACKIO that we will continue to work on it. Again, once we get the assays back, we'll do what we do with that. We've got a certain way to look at all of the elements, and just looking for specific characteristics within the elemental signatures, things such as lead isotopes or even uranium parity. Just really trying to map out the idea that there was fluid flow, uranium-rich fluid flow in the area versus not, and that kind of dictates what happens afterwards. We've also sent some clay samples in for clay determination, species determination, because again, certain clays have characteristics of being around uranium deposits, and there are subtle features that you can map out in those that can also indicate whether you've had the right fluids or not. And we've got a third study that we've sent 5 samples to the University of Saskatchewan, looking at quartz irradiation studies. So the alpha particles that are emitted from uranium, thorium, and their decay products have a characteristic effect on quartz. So when you've got quartz veins, that are associated with this alteration that we think could have been uranium bearing. If there's uranium flowing through those structures, or uranium fluids flowing through those structures, then they would have had an impact on the quartz veins that were already there, or the quartz veins that maybe even formed after, which should have no defects if the uranium fluids are already gone. So there's a few things that we're trying to piece all together in a broader study of this one target area. But seeing the alteration that we've seen, and just the potential for fluids, for uranium bearing fluids, using the same structures, repeated structural events with different fluid characteristics, that was the big win for us at Catharsis. Because again, we're far enough outside of the basin. We didn't know what to expect, but now that we see the possibility of the structures and the alteration systems and remobilized structures with different fluid characteristics, gives us really positive hope that a lot of our other targets will have the same type of structures. And it's just a matter of finding the right one that has carried uranium fluids and deposited.
Is it more likely that if your 3 studies that you do, if they come back corroborating or supporting the thesis that there was a uranium-rich fluid passing through here, is it likely that it's going to prompt a phase 2 drilling program on this target area or on other targets areas, or is it too early to tell which way it goes?
No, that's pretty accurate, and we would look at both. If all of the analysis show that there was uranium-bearing fluids within the area, then yes, we will go right back to this target area. Because as mentioned right away, we've got oxidized fluids, we've got reduced fluids. We just haven't seen that redox boundary. So if we can get in there and make a discovery on that, well, that's win number 1. But then we do have all of these other targets that even if we don't find any corroborating evidence of uranium-bearing fluids in this one target area, that doesn't mean that that hasn't been the case in these other target areas. So they all still need to be tested anyway. So down the road, we've identified at least 15 drill-ready targets already on Catharsis. That's quite a bit, and it's going to take a number of years to really start defining them all properly. So it's a project that we're not going to walk away from just based on these first results. It has, if anything, it has encouraged us to want to get back there and do some more drill exploration on the project.
The statistics on projects and on discovery rates are such that one must expect, investing in this area or working in this area, one must expect that you have to work on a number of projects and multiple prospects within that project to increase your success rate or increase your chances of making a successful discovery. Because it's difficult. If it was easy, everyone would be doing it.
Yep, absolutely. That's why I think that I like what we do. I think that we're very effective and efficient with our shareholder dollars. That we have a certain unique way of prioritizing drill targets, and I can almost guarantee that we would always hit alteration and structure, which are 2 of the key elements you need to find for uranium deposits. Just the question that nobody can answer, because there's no geophysical survey out there that can do it, is were any of those structures uranium bearing? You can't answer that. The only way to answer that is with the old truth finder at the diamond drill.
And the next drill program you're going to be doing is in the summer at ACKIO. Can you give me a kind of a rough time when you're going to be starting that program?
I was hoping to get up there sooner, but we learned a valuable lesson from last year in that April and May, the area got a little bit too wet just because of the snow melt.
Yep.
So we want to avoid that this year. So we'll patiently wait for the majority of the snow melt to dissipate and leach into the ground. So we can have a little bit of water on the ground, that's fine. Everything's going to be helicopter supported again, so we don't have an impact on the ground. But so probably that will be around May, June. We'll have to get in there early to make sure the camp is all operational again, get that all set up before the drills come in. But then we'd like to get everything planned ahead, so get our drill pads built before the drills come in. So I would expect around May that we should be mobilizing and starting our preparation work for ACKIO. And hopefully by June, we'll have at least one drill spinning on ACKIO, targeting the nearer surface mineralization.
And have you got a conceptual first drill budget for that in terms of meters?
Yep. Yes, we do. We've had this looked at externally, and we've been the guidance that we've received is that we don't have to drill as many meters as we did last summer. So that's a big win for us as well. Just to even get to the inferred resource category on ACKIO. So we can be looking at basically 10,000 meters or less, and budget-wise, that should be around 5 million. Just kind of upping the cost on that. It shouldn't be 5 million to do 10,000 meters, but rather play it safe than sorry.
Yeah.
And given all that, and we drilled 20,000 meters comfortably last year, that we do have other target areas around ACKIO, and even we still haven't given up on the unconformity target area that exists at ACKIO, and we'll have news about that out because it just looks ripe. The unconformity at ACKIO looks ripe for discovery. We just never drilled it the right way. Now that we know what the structures are doing, and some of the chemical work, and even the quartz irradiation study that we've done at ACKIO is all suggesting there's an unconformity target to the southeast of where we've drilled. So these are the type of targets that we want to investigate. There's other geophysical targets within the ACKIO area that we really want to follow up on. Then there are some more regional targets for exploration they look ripe for discovery. And the only way to make that discovery is to get out there and put the drill in the ground. So we'll see if we can do it all, but the main focus really is that the definition drilling on ACKIO. That is the big priority push. If exploration gets pushed off to the side this year, then so be it. There's always next year.
So that 10,000 meters that you talked about, kind of targeting inferred resources, that's definition drilling. So at a minimum, you're going to do 10,000 meters on ACKIO itself. And if your efficiencies allow it and if your budgets allow it, you will invest drill meters in exploration targets.
Yes.
And what's the cash position at the moment?
Cash position is about $8 million, so we're well funded. Most of that though is all hard dollars. We've got about a couple million, about $2 million in flow through, and that's what we've left after the Catharsis drill program. We've got about $2 million left to start up ACKIO again. So some of that will have to go into the startup process of ACKIO, and then the remaining, let's say 1.5, would go directly into the drill program to get that rocking and rolling.
Good. So just in terms of kind of breaking down the news flow, up until the start of ACKIO, let's call it June. I mean, I know you'll be putting out a mobilization news release in May, saying the crew's kind of heading up there. But so for the next 3 months or so, it's ongoing analysis and ranking of targets at Catharsis.
Yeah, we may not release those. Like, those can be internal, but when the results do come out, that's something that we will share with the public for sure. Again, because if we can define uranium bearing fluid system at Catharsis, that's an even bigger win than what we've just achieved. And then we've got some educational pieces that we will be putting out regarding ACKIO. So like I mentioned with the sandstone target, how we developed it, why we think it's still positive for exploration and discovery. So things like that, we'd like to educate our shareholders, but also just the general public. And anybody interested in uranium, I think, can learn quite a bit from what we've got coming. And then you've always got the one that I've had in the back of my head for a while, is why we honestly believe that ACKIO is an open pit deposit and has the merits to be an open pit.
Have you put out a kind of a guidance on kind of an exploration target? What you'd like to, what the potential dimensions are of this? I know you can't preempt what a resource calculation looks like, but have you given any guidance on kind of scale and target size that you think is likely to drive economics or drive capital here?
Not really, because it's a little bit tricky. We put out a news release with the exploration plans in December of last year that did showcase we've got 4 target areas within a kilometer of ACKIO that could have potential for more discoveries, and those need to be drilled off. The thing with Athabasca deposits is that they're very pod-like in nature. You can follow along the trend, and you can have some dead zones in between, and then you discover another pod down the road. So it's difficult to really give that sort of context as to where further mineralization can be without drilling. So we've just had to generalize it with showing. You can go back to that anybody can go back to that news release and see the 4 target areas that we've defined within the kilometer surrounding area of ACKIO.
When I first spoke with you, we talked about a kind of the standard on the classic Athabasca style deposit needing to be more than 200 million pounds because they were deep and buried and under the sediments. And I think you said at the time that a surface deposit outside of the Athabasca could certainly be a lot less than that. I can't remember what you actually said. It might have been 50 million pounds or closer to 100 million pounds. But what are your thoughts on kind of what you need to be economic?
I think it's much less, to be honest. So those numbers were numbers that were originally brought to my attention back when I was working at Hathor. And it was the idea was that if you need to go underground, you have to have at least 200 million pounds. That's within the sandstone basin. If you want to do an open pit, you need to have at least 50 million pounds. Now, I think that I've learned quite a lot since then, and that those numbers don't hold any weight to them, because you look at what's happening, and one of the next deposit that Cameco is trying to advance into a mine is Millennium, which is underground, very deeply underground. It's much deeper than Cigar or MacArthur, and that's not a 200 million pound deposit. If you look at some of these open pits that were recently dug out at the Sioux deposits that Orano and Denison have up near McLean Lake, those were not 50 million pound deposits. So there has to be some leeway, and I think maybe those numbers, 200 million pounds and 50 million pounds, you have to add on building a mill, and so that's why you probably need higher amounts or higher concentrations of uranium. So without needing to build a mill, though, I think you can do it much lower tonnages. So
you're saying that Millennium was smaller than 200 million pounds, and Sioux was smaller than 50 million pounds?
Yes.
It's funny, isn't it? It's we've got these anchoring points in our head which perhaps are not very helpful, and it really comes down to the economics of it. If you can get something up and running for a low capex, and you can run it at a high profit margin, you're going to make your return on investment and possibly go for it. Whereas if you just say, oh, it's less than 50 million pounds, and you stop there, you wouldn't go for it.
And this is where one of these educational pieces that I'm working on. If you look at Rabbit Lake was a 30 million pound deposit. It was open pitable. Mineralization started, I think, around 15 to 20 meters beneath the surface, and it was all lower grade, about 0.3% average grade. So it's not your typical, hey, I'm a 2% Athabasca style deposit. No, this was 0.3%, and it built the mill for the Collins Bay deposits, for the Eagle Point deposit. 30 million pounds at 0.3% built the mill, and it has a long history to it. If you go over to the Clough Lake side of things, they were mining small underground deposits, 50,000 pounds, to go underground and extract ore from there. Why would you do that if you're not going to make money? To me, that just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And if you look at 0.3% in ppm terms, that's 3,000 ppm, which if you look at anywhere else in the world with an open pit, 3,000 ppm is kind of its whoopee. I mean, that's a high grade for an open pit.
Exactly, it's huge. No, that's a big number, and I think a lot of people lose focus on that because all they're used to seeing MacArthur River, Cigar Lake over 20%. You're used to seeing Key Lake and at 2% and other deposits at 1%. And they lose focus on the economic side of things and just focus on you need to have high grade. High grade is not king.
What's the investor community talking to you about? I mean, are you speaking to institutions? Is there awareness that 0.3% in an open pit is good? I mean, what's the mood like we've kind of slightly gone through a doldrums period in the uranium sector, even though metal prices are actually strong and steady. They're $51, $52 per pound, and the contract prices are coming on. That everything's going in the right way, but it seems as if the market itself has stalled a bit. I just wondered what your interaction with the institutions was.
Institutions that I've talked to are all in the same boat. They all think that ACKIO is a wonderful deposit with the ability to move forward as an open pit and even hit this cycle for production. It has everything going. Again, the grades are there. We've got certain higher grade zones, but the big takeaway is the proximity to infrastructure. We're not out in the middle of nowhere, and we've got near surface mineralization. Mineralization is starting as shallow as about 25 meters, 28 meters beneath the surface. Digging away the overburden to that depth is not a very labor or costly, it's not a costly endeavor. This is something that can be done quite rapidly. And then again, you've got mineralization exposed right there at surface after that. And it's just dig it up or blast it and ship it down to the mill.
You and I could probably sit down and name 20 institutions that we know that love uranium. And they've been bullish for a long time, and they've bought into the uranium thesis. Are you seeing any new entrants? Are you seeing any people who are saying, actually, I've converted my view on the energy transition and I'm now pro-nuclear? Are you seeing any new investor names?
Not really, to be honest. That the people that I've been speaking to have been bulls since I've been around, basically. Like a lot of these institutions, they've been long uranium. Even when uranium was in the doldrums, they all knew it was a matter of when, not if, the uranium was going to come back.
Talking about ACKIO being a deposit in this uranium cycle, because there are two questions on this. There are two parts of this. One is how long does this cycle run for, but also how long does it take to bring ACKIO into production? Because that immediately gets me thinking about permits and the view of the authorities, the Saskatchewan government and the kind of the federal government. Is there a real desire to see new uranium open pits in Canada?
I would hope so. The uranium open pits can be very safely done, and one of the benefits of ACKIO is that it is not a super high grade deposit. So the dust or any radioactive controls are not. I'm not going to say it's not as stringent as other deposits would have to be, but yes, they would still have to be rather stringent and well controlled. There are definitely ways to control dust suppression within an open pit environment, to prevent waterways from becoming contaminated, or at least I'm not even going to say contaminated, because I think that's the wrong word, but interact. There are ways to deter waterways from interacting with an open pit mining operation. So I think it can be very safely done. I looked to the history of open pit mining in the Athabasca Basin, and it is the most numerous mining operations within the Athabasca. It's been tried, tested, proven true. There are no legacy issues with these open pits. They're all under control and well monitored. So I don't see it being a real issue. What do the feds and the provincial governments want? I honestly can't answer that. I know our province, Saskatchewan, very mining friendly. They obviously want to see more mines into production. That's one of the things I've heard for a number of years now, even on the rare earth side of things. They want to get into the rare earth game, which is why they've built a rare earth plant here in Saskatchewan. The federal side of things always hard to gauge, but historically, it's been from discovery to production anywhere from 5 to 10 years, maybe a little bit more, up to 12 years. But it's not one of these type of deposits that sit there and languish in jurisdictional or just, I guess, engineering issues that keep them underground for 50 years plus.
Yeah. It's interesting. Thank you. That's a really interesting answer. I'm glad I asked the question about open pits, because you said in there that it was the most numerous style of deposit in Saskatchewan were open pit uranium mines. Did I hear that right?
Yep. No, I said that. I just have to go back and look at my numbers and make sure that's true.
because Saskatchewan's a big place, but it's kind of a uranium place as well. So most of the uranium mines are open pits. Is basically that's what you're saying?
Yep. Collins Bay, Rabbit Lake, Sioux deposits, Clough Lake were half and half. There were some open pits over at Beaver Lodge. Most of those at Beaver Lodge were all underground, though. MacArthur and Cigar underground, yeah, and Eagle Point. So I would say that most of the mines in Saskatchewan were open pit.
Obviously, the regulatory environment changes over time, so it doesn't get any easier. But one would hope that with an awareness of climate change responsibilities, energy transition, critical metals, that there'll be some impetus as well as some resistance. So hopefully those development timelines stay on track.
Well, the last open pit mine that was operational in Saskatchewan, the uranium mine that was open pit, the last open pit uranium mine in Saskatchewan was operational in 2007. So that's not that long ago.
It's not ancient history.
And it's not like you're looking at the 60s and 70s when anything passed. These were modern times, and I don't think the jurisdictions any of the permitting issues would have changed all that much between now and then.
Good. Well, I mean, obviously permitting is a good thing to talk about, but the first thing to do is go and find a deposit, or define a deposit. Get those limits around the envelope of mineralization in a first pass effort. So that's the job for the summer, James.
Sure is. I have no idea. It's the job even before the summer. It's been the job over the Christmas holidays.
Good. Well, thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing the news flow as it comes during the course of the year.
All right. Thanks a lot, Merlin. Always a pleasure.